Booktopians. Today I am thrilled to be speaking with Lisa Wilkinson about her new memoir, It Wasn't Meant to Be Like This, which you can order right now at booktopia.com.au. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you so much.
And I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Lisa, how long had you been planning to write a memoir?
Well, I wasn't planning to write a memoir, to be honest. I had the great privilege of being approached to do the annual 𝙄𝙩 𝙒𝙖𝙨 media lecture back in 2013, an offer that I was going to completely reject and not tell anyone I'd ever even been asked, because apart from the fact that it was an extraordinary honour, I knew that getting up and delivering that lecture, if I was going to do it, I had to have something to say, something meaningful to say. I had to add to the conversation. And I also knew the history of it, you know, people like Laurie Oakes and Ray Martin and, I mean, Lachlan Murdoch and 𝙤𝙩 𝙒𝙩 had all delivered that lecture. I did not feel worthy of that company. But what I also realised was I was only the second female journalist in 17 years to be asked to do it. And I remember thinking, what? How's that the case? And, you know, so I started thinking about it, and I did a lot of my thinking back in those days at 3 a.m. as I jumped in the shower before I would head off to the Today Show. And each morning I would stand there thinking about, you know, the fact that 𝙤𝙩 had done it, and I was only the second female journalist. And I just thought, let's think a little bit more about some of the injustices that exist in the media and biases against women, not only by the media, but in the media. And I started to think, maybe I do have something to say. And it took me all of that year of 2013 to write it. And after I delivered the lecture, I had a huge response and was approached by a number of publishers to write my autobiography. And I said to them at the time, look, I don't think I'm quite ready yet, but if you're prepared to play the long game on this, so am I. And sure enough, HarperCollins were extremely patient. But at the beginning of last year, they said to me, we think it's time. Like, you've had a bit happen to you the last couple of years. You've left the Today Show now, and now you're at the project and you're doing, you know, long form journalism, and we think now is time. And so I just started writing. I mean, originally, I am married to Australia's most successful non-fiction non-fiction author in Peter Fitzsimons. And I said to him at the time, look, I managed to write that lecture, 5,000 words, and I regularly write 1,000 word articles when I'm asked, but like, I'd have to write 100,000 words. I can't write 100,000 words. And he said, don't worry, I'll help you. I'll interview you and we'll transcribe the tapes, and I'll lay down a basic bed of words, and then you come in over the top, you fill in all the gaps, you put your texture and flavour across it, and then I think you'll have yourself a book. And I said, okay, fine. And in about 2017, I said to Pete, let's start doing some of those interviews. And so we did about 6 hours worth of interviews over the course of a couple of weeks. And about a month after we did them, I said to Pete, did you get those tapes transcribed? And he said, no, it's fine. Yeah, I'll get that done. And then I asked him again. And after about another month, I said, where are we up to with those transcriptions? Because I wouldn't mind doing it. And he just looked at me. I said, you bugger, you've lost those tapes, haven't you? And he said, yes. And I just thought, because he's always so busy writing his own books, that what you don't want in a marriage is to be constantly going to your partner cap in hand saying, please, can you help me? You know, and then be beholden to them, because I still want to yell at him when he doesn't take the garbage out. But, you know, there was going to be a trade-off, and I just thought, I'll just start writing. And I did, and 187,000 words later, I handed him the manuscript and said, didn't need you at all.
So you mentioned that HarperCollins kind of came to you and were like, now is the time. You obviously agreed with that. What do you think are like, why was now the right time for you to write and deliver this book?
Because I think a lot had happened in that time between 2013 and now. And I just thought, I'm just going to start writing and see how I go. And really the words, the stories, the incredible highs and lows that I've been through, the extraordinary opportunities that have been handed to me, which, you know, all of which I've worked incredibly hard to not only, when I say handed to me, I'm probably doing myself an injustice. I've always had a really good talent for when opportunities have come along, I've recognized them. And, you know, it goes right back to, I wanted to be a journalist when I left school. And I just thought, I grew up in the western suburbs of Sydney. I feel like I've lived too small a life to this point to warrant becoming a journalist. I haven't seen the big wide world, so I wanted to travel. And so I went to business college, got shorthand and typing, and thought I'll work for a year or two, hopefully somewhere close to the media where I can sort of get a sense of what that's like. And then I'm going to travel for a couple of years. And then I'm going to come back and I'll feel worthy to apply to be a journalist. But after I went to business college, the very first day I went looking for a job, I went to the women and girls employment section of the Sydney Morning Herald and stopped at the letter D because there was an ad there that said Dolly magazine is looking for a secretary stroke editorial assistant stroke girl Friday who is prepared to do absolutely anything. Phone Kathy on 699-3622. And I did. And I got the job. And from the moment I walked in there, and this is from a girl who, you know, had 7 years worth of back copies of Dolly under my bed. I was a dyed-in-the-wool Dolly fan all through my teenage years. So I knew the product. But the magazine was faltering a bit at that time. And subconsciously, I knew what to do to fix it. And every time I put forward an idea, the 55-year-old editor, who I should say at this point does not sound at all old to me, she was a bit out of touch though at the time, was taking on board all of my ideas. And so I sort of rose through the ranks really quickly because I was like this instant market research who also wanted to write. So it was, I think I've always been really good at seeing small opportunities and making them big and working really hard in order for that to happen. And with every job I've ever had, I've not only loved every job I've ever had, when a new opportunity has come along, I've never wanted those new opportunities. I have always been happy where I've been. But I'm also one of those people who never wants to die wondering when a challenge presents itself. So that's why I've just kind of continued to take on these big roles and loved every single one of them.
You also write about your childhood in the book and growing up in Campbelltown. What was it like to go back and turn over some of those childhood memories?
Incredibly sweet, but also some of them were very bitter. Sweet because I had a beautiful childhood, and Campbelltown was, you know, almost rural farming community when I was growing up. It was still a country town. And, you know, obviously it changed a lot through the 60s and 70s when I was living there. But, you know, we swam at the local public swimming pool. I mean, I'll never forget the big day when Campbelltown had its own Olympic-sized public swimming pool. I went to Sunday school. I played cricket in the street with all the kids in the street until the street lights, which we only got when I was about 8 or 9 from memory. And most of it was dirt track leading out to, you know, the bush. And so it was a really lovely childhood. I was passionate about ballet. I started that when I was 5, and my career trajectory right up until I was 15 was that I wanted to be a ballerina. But the bitter part, which I outline in the book, was I was really badly bullied at school, and I'm sure a lot of people listening can relate to it. And as a result of that, I did what a lot of people do when they get bullied. You try and stay small. You try to make sure that you don't shine anywhere. So I stopped ballet, because every time I walked to ballet, I had to walk past what was basically the local clubhouse for the bullies. And it was just easier to stay small. But around about the same time, I went to a sleepover at a girlfriend's house, and I was sexually assaulted by her father. And that's a story that I wasn't going to include in the book until earlier this year, when I interviewed Brittany Higgins. And when I saw the courage, as so many women across the country saw the courage of Brittany Higgins to stand up against a government that did everything they could to try and bury Brittany's story, not only before it went to air, but after it went to air. And she maintained her strength and her dignity, and continues to stand tall, that I decided I have to tell my entire story. So, you know, as I said, there were bitter moments, and there were, but overwhelmingly sweet moments, and that's all there in the book. And I hope as people read it, you know, they have really fond memories, as I do, of, you know, growing up watching sitcoms like, you know, I Dream of Jeannie and Bewitched and Gilligan's Island. And one of the things that I learnt really early on with those sitcoms is, even though so often the women in those sitcoms were housewives and, you know, sort of downtrodden by men, that was if you just looked at it very superficially. The common thread, if you have a look at those shows, and somehow this got into my head, that all of these women ultimately won the day if they could work out how to navigate around the system that was set up by the blokes in whatever their situation was. I mean, even Jeannie in I Dream of Jeannie, she called him master. Dr. Nelson was master. But even she worked out how to get around that system. In Get Smart, 99 was the smart one. You know, it's, and all of that got in. But I think of all of the shows that I watched as a teenager, the one that really influenced me was the Mary Tyler Moore Show. It was the first time I saw a woman who was in her 30s, happily single, not looking for a man. She was working in a men's environment and winning. She was fighting for equal pay, and she was doing it all in fringe suede jackets and go-go boots in an open-top Mustang with a great dirty big M on the wall of her apartment that she lived in on her own. And every time that show came on, and I would sing along with the theme, "You're Gonna Make It After All," and she threw her hat in the air, that was the life that I wanted to live. I wanted to live my life throwing my hat in the air.
So you've mentioned, you know, obviously you have some people who've inspired you from, you know, the media that you've consumed, and then throughout your career, you've had the opportunity to meet so many amazing people and have conversations with them. You mentioned before that Brittany Higgins had a direct impact on some of the things you chose to include in the book. Have there been other people throughout your career that you've encountered and had conversations with who have really inspired you, or kind of given you the opportunity to really reflect on your career and your trajectory?
It's extraordinary, the breadth of people that I've spoken to. And the reason I got into journalism is because I wanted to hear other people's stories, because everyone has a story. And that's why I took so long to tell my own, because I wanted to make sure that, you know, I had enough stories of my own to tell to hold people's interest. But I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I got to interview Elton John. But the stories that really have always stayed with me, like Brittany, are the people that don't have a public profile, who have had, you know, who've triumphed over great sadness, or have been through injustices. And because of the programs that I've worked on or the publications that I've worked for, I've been able to help facilitate that injustice being righted. So, I mean, I've interviewed thousands of people now, and they all live within me as a great privilege.
There's a story you relate about starting a 2-week stint filling in for Mel, co-hosting Sunrise. And you mentioned that you felt nervous about doing it in the first place. And then the Boxing Day tsunami hit. What was it like handling that situation at that point in your career? And what did it make clear for you personally?
It was completely terrifying. It was, as we all know, the Boxing Day tsunami was in 2004, and the executive producer, Adam Boland, had said to me, you know, when he asked me to do that fill-in stint, don't worry, that time of the year, it's really quiet news time. The politicians are all on holidays. We'll do lots of best of packages, and you'll have Koshi sitting next to you. He'll look after you and it'll be fine. And the day before, when I tuned into the afternoon conference call that you always do when you do breakfast television, when you work out what's going to be on the next day's show, I logged into the call, and a lot of the producers were already talking, and I heard one of them say, I think it was that, you know, maybe as many as 50 people have died. And then somebody else said, oh no, CNN is reporting a much higher number. And I said, sorry guys, you know, we've got all the Fitzsimons family on our front lawn at the moment. I haven't been watching the news. What's going on? And they told me that there'd been this dreadful tsunami. And sure enough, by the time I turned up at work the next day, and I stayed up all night watching the overseas news and the reports, you know, there were thousands being reported dead at that stage, and the week went on and it just got worse and worse and worse. And I just had to wing it. And I didn't have any choice but to wing it, because in the middle of a disaster on that scale, that was not the time to put my hand up and say, I have no idea what I'm doing here. So, you know, sometimes in my career, I've just had to look like I'm gliding along the top of the water, but paddle really hard underneath.
You, of course, talk about your family as well. What's it like when you kind of decide that you're going to write an autobiography, and then you have to tell the people that you're closest to in your life that they're going to be in there, and you're going to be sharing some of the experiences that you had with them?
Well, everyone was fine with it because they have shared those experiences with me. And there's a few names that I've changed in the book in order to protect the privacy of some people who I didn't think it was fair to reveal their identities. The most difficult conversation I had to have was with my girlfriend, whose father assaulted me when I was 15. And I only told her shortly before the book came out, because I didn't want her to have to sit with that for a long lead up time before it came out. And the first thing she said to me, she apologized to me. And I said to her, you do not have to apologize to me. You didn't do this. Your father did. And victims of sexual assault so often are made to feel like they must have done something for that to happen. They must have put themselves in a dangerous situation. And we have to stop that. And we have to stop the people who, you know, were maybe close by at the time, who didn't know. We have to stop them feeling like they have to apologize for not knowing. Because what happens in those moments is, and I made this decision to stay silent. And this was back in the 70s, I thought through all the scenarios of what would happen if I went and told someone about this. My parents, my father knew this man, and they were both in the Lions Club in Campbelltown. what would that look like? How would my father handle that? And I knew he would have done something about it, and I knew he would have believed me, but I didn't want to put my father through that. What would happen if I told my girlfriend then? What would the other side of that look like? Would police get involved? What would the other side of that look like? My life as I knew it would have been over. So it was just easier to stay silent. And the good thing is, as women have linked arms around the country this year and said that silence isn't getting us anywhere, and we're not going to keep men's secrets anymore in the workplace when it comes to violence and sexual assault. If we link arms and make sure that our voices are heard, we realise how loud we can be when we all act together, when we all listen to each other.
Do you think writing an autobiography is a cathartic experience?
Yeah, definitely. And quite an emotional experience, going through everything, because I think all of us tend to lead such incredibly busy lives these days. You know, we're bombarded with stuff all the time. And sometimes it's easier just swimming along on the surface and not going down into the depths where, you know, there can often be a lot of silt. And when you stir up that silt, it gets a bit muddy. And I've had to do that in writing the book. But I feel so much better for having gone through that process, and hopefully sharing with women in particular, who, many of whom perhaps only know me through my TV work. They don't know my backstory of how I got to be on TV, and risks that I took, and failures that I've had, and, you know, my childhood. They don't know all of that backstory. So I would like to think that people read the story and feel like they understand more about why I've acted certain ways, why I've been passionate about particular topics, why I have felt strong at moments when I should have felt weak, and felt weak at moments when I should have been strong.
I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I've got one more question, which is, do you think you will put pen to paper again and have more books in the future?
Oh, let's wait and see what happens from here. The great thing about my life is it's always been an open book, and I've never known what the next chapter is going to look like, because I kind of like being surprised. So yes, very possibly.
Excellent. Lisa Wilkinson, thank you so much for your time. It Wasn't Meant to Be Like This is available right now at booktopia.com.au.
Thank you so much.